concepts after you had learned to use the concepts that were used to make the endorsements that you were inter alia withholding in the case of those. But he's also saying that the non-inferential uses of any concepts presuppose the inferential uses of those very same concepts. So that there could not be concepts whose only use was to make non-inferential reports, observation reports. They have to be usable also in inferences. Well, obviously as the premises of inferences, but he's claiming also as the conclusions of inferences, so that any concept that has non-inferential uses must have inferential uses as well. Now, one epistemologically significant expression of the myth of the given is the idea that from an epistemological point of view, the world comes painted in secondary qualities. That is, that all you can really experience is the secondary qualities, and that we have to make inferences from those secondary qualities, from the occurrence of those secondary qualities to the occurrence of everything else. And we might then ask, well, what are these secondary quality concepts of which you talk? It's actually Galileo's notion, where he says, look, what there really is what geometry describes. The Book of Nature is written in the language of geometry. There are shapes and sizes and shapes and sizes and motions, but there aren't colors. The colors are the result of the interaction of us with those things. They're products of those interactions. They're produced in us by the primary qualities that are there. And people like Locke take over this distinction. And now we could ask, well, suppose we have learned all the Sellarsian lessons and rejected the myth of the given, then there's going to be lots of things we can't say about our awareness of secondary quality concepts. But how are we to understand them? Well, I think Evans offers us the following. Whether this is exactly his view, because he has collateral commitments that are relevant, but that I'm going to ignore here. There are some concepts that have observational uses that are not, we want to say, essentially observational in the way that secondary quality concepts are. So geometrical concepts are like that. Being circular or triangular, they have observational uses. We can see that something is circular or triangular, but blind geometers can have full mastery of the concept of circularity or triangularity. There's nothing they don't understand about circles or triangles because they don't know what they look like. That's just sort of a contingent aspect of them. Where the intuition is, red is not like that. If you don't know what red things look like in the ordinary way of talking, that is, if you can't use red observationally, there's something essential to that concept that you're missing. That's the intuition behind thinking of these as secondary quality concepts. And what I'd like to point out is we could produce from the concept square a secondary quality concept, square star, which is just like the concept of square, except you don't count as having full mastery of the concept square star unless you can use it observationally, unless you can tell by looking at something under standard conditions whether it's square. Given any concept that has an observational use, we could produce a concept from it that was a secondary quality analog of it, that was just like that concept, except you only counted as fully mastering the secondary quality concept analog of it if you also could use it non-inferentially in observation reports. So on this account, we can say what it is for red to be a secondary quality concept. To master the concept of red, you have to master enough of its inferential role to know that being red rules out being green for a monochromatic patch, that it entails its being colored, that it's entailed by its being scarlet. You have to know how to reason with red claims as premises, conclusions, as reasons for, and as reasons against. But in addition, you don't count as fully mastering it unless you can use it as an observation concept. And any concept that has an observational use has an analog, has a cousin of it that is a secondary quality concept in that sense. So we don't need to think about some ontological difference in the philosophy of mind between secondary quality concepts and others. It's, again, just something that we can talk about in terms of surface features of the use of the concept. Okay. Another thing I want to say, we talked a little bit about the observation here. Sellars is thinking of these non-inferential uses as at least having as necessary conditions 2 dimensions of their use. You have to have mastered the concept, which at least sometimes he identifies with the inferential role in a fairly narrow sense of inferential, that is, the language moves involving it. And you have to be a reliable applier of it under standard, non-inferentially under standard conditions. In this way, we can talk about something being observational for one person that isn't observational for another. So the experienced archaeologist has got RDRDs that let her respond differentially to Aztec potsherds than to Toltec potsherds. She could just sort them by looking at them. She's not making inferences about them. We would have to learn the theory. The Toltec ones had this particular squiggle on them, or a darker glaze or something like that. But she can just look. And in the same way, one can become a non-inferential reporter of things that we would normally say weren't observable. The mu mesons in the bubble chamber may be literally observable by a suitably trained physicist. There's a reliably co-varying chain of events, causal chain of events, that starts with the mu meson, goes through the hooked vapor trail, and ends up eliciting a report. There's a mu meson, non-inferentially, from the physicist. We say, well, what is it for it to be the mu meson that he's observing in the sense of non-inferentially making claims about, rather than the hooked vapor trail? Well, that's a matter of the inferential role of the claim that he makes. He's saying, there's a mu meson. By the way, mu mesons move almost at the speed of light, and they're extremely small. The inferential consequences of the claim he makes is what determines which element in this chain he's reporting. That's why we're reporting the ringing of the bell and not the vibration of our tympanic membranes, it's because the report we're making talks about bells, not about these, even though it's the same reliably covarying chain of events. Yeah.
So in this case with the RDs, last week you talked about material inference and in language rules, some reflections in language games, language rules, behavior, how we finally got toward understanding material inferences in terms of subjunctively robust conditionals. If we were to express the RDRDs, are those also subjunctive conditionals?
Yep.
Okay.
So we can say, if that were red, he would report it,
okay.
As long as the conditions are standard. And importantly, those can be taken up in our inferential practices when, I call these reliability inferences, but if we ask, well, what is it for me to take you to be a reliable reporter of red things? That's for me to endorse an inference from he said it was red to it's red. And standard conditions come in as collateral premises in that. Okay, and this has been mentioned before, but I want to remind you that if it turns out that there are conditions under which one can be trained reliably differentially to respond non-inferentially by applying normative vocabulary, by saying that's a paradigm case of cruelty, Nietzsche breaking down when the cartman is beating his horse to death, if, as seems to be the case, properly brought up people can be trained non-inferentially to respond to paradigm cases of cruelty, say, by saying that's cruel, responding to it as cruel, then on this account there's no reason not to say that they are perceiving the normative status of the cruelty of it. And this is how I think we should talk about the fact that when you hear me talk, what you in the first instance hear is what I'm saying, not the noises that I'm making. That you have to go through a special kind of bracketing, a shift of attention in order to listen to the noises I'm making. Because what you're non-inferentially, differentially responding to is the meanings. It's the content of what I'm saying. And those are normatively articulated. The meanings are mattered well, and that's incompatible with this, and that follows from that. It turns out that native speakers can learn non-inferentially to respond to the contents of people's claims. And it seems to me that the Sellarsian account in terms of RDRDs and looking at the concepts that you apply, the commitments you make, the inferentially articulated commitments you make as the responses, don't need to think of that as sufficient, but thinking those as the fundamental elements sort of helps us in thinking about how much there is in the world that's observable. That I can, the good mechanic can observe that the machine is broken or it's not broken, for instance. Quite sophisticated things. Okay, there's another set of claims that Sellars makes in the rest of this first half of the essay that I'm addressing in these last bits of the handout. So in the middle of page 4, I'm jumping from 22 to 32 in the sections of of EPM, and sort of recommend that you do too, at least the first time through. These are all the considerations that come up from here through the end of it are in the vicinity of the claim he only makes explicitly in 45, and it's the very last thing on this handout. We now recognize that instead of coming to have a concept of something, because we have noticed that sort of thing, to have the ability to notice a sort of thing is already to have the concept of that sort of thing and cannot account for it. So the empiricist picture was you get presented with these sense experiences of red things and triangles and so on, and you see them and recognize the similarities between them, and then by a process of abstraction, association, the exact sort of set of practical abilities they're helping themselves to as primitive abilities changes depending on who you're talking about, and even whether it's the treatise or the inquiry and so on, but still you elaborate a concept out of noticing these similarities. So what you have is what you come with is something like an innate similarity space, an innate capacity to treat some things as more similar and others as less similar. And Sellars wants to say, Sellars is claiming here, well, if by noticing you just mean responding differentially, then okay, you can notice things without having a concept of them. But that's a very minimal sense of awareness. I mean, you respond differentially to deadly poisons than to things that are not deadly poisons as well. Anything you can have an RD for, in a certain sense, you're noticing it, you're responding differentially to it, but that's not the sense of awareness that he's addressing. Sort of sapient awareness that can be elevated to the state of knowing something, requires applying the concept to it, responding to it differentially by applying a concept to it, where the concept is something that plays an inferential role, for instance, can be a premise in an inference that justifies some other claim. So it's not until you have the concept read that you can notice red things. Even though you could be trained to respond differentially to them, you're not aware of them in the way we should be talking about noticing. Well, that raises the question, well, how do you ever learn to call red things red? I mean, he adds this, he articulates this further, starting here in 35. An overt or covert token of this is green in the presence of a green item is a Konstitution. That's Schlick's term. Neurath calls them Protokollsätze. And why he's throwing this in, I guess, just to show his allegiance. Yes, I'm still downstream from the Vienna Circle here. And expresses observational knowledge if and only if it's a manifestation of a tendency to produce overt or covert tokens of this is green, given a certain set, if and only if a green object is being looked at in standard conditions. That's the RDRD. So clearly you can't just say that. That's H. Price's thermometer view, that was one of his teachers at Oxford. The issue is the authority, this normative dimension, the endorsement one. Clearly, in typing out these quotes, I noticed that there are vast stretches in the middle of EPM where the word clearly occurs every second or third sentence, also to be avoided. Clearly, on this account, the only thing that can remotely be supposed to constitute such authority is the fact that one can infer the presence of a green object from the fact that someone makes this report. This is the origin of the idea of a reliability inference. But jumping to the bolded end of 35 here, for a constitutum, this is green. To express observational knowledge, not only must it be a symptom or sign of the presence of a green object in standard conditions, but the perceiver must know that tokens of this is green are symptoms of the presence of green objects in conditions which are standard for visual perception. So it's not enough to be reliable, you've got to know you're reliable in order to count as entitled to the claim that you make. Now this is a very strong claim and raises the stakes for an account of acquisition of these concepts. Let me just mention some of the issues in the vicinity of this. So a basic distinction in theories of knowledge is between justificatory internalism and justificatory externalism. And it turns on just this issue that he's making, though people didn't talk this way yet. Then Price, the thermometer view, would today be called a reliabilist. He's saying your entitlement consists just in your having a reliable belief-forming mechanism that this is the output of. If, in fact, you reliably respond to red things by saying that it's red, then you're entitled to that claim. And there are people, there are live reliabilists today. Sellars is rejecting that because he thinks you don't know it if you can't justify it. And what are you going to give as a reason? Well, you're going to have to cite your reliability, he thinks. So there's a couple of things to say about that. McDowell, for instance, is a justificatory internalist. He thinks you have to be able to give a reason. But he disagrees with Sellars on this point. He not only thinks you don't need to know you're reliable, but that citing your reliability isn't good enough. That would be taking only having available a third-person point of view to your own reports, and it can't be like that all the way down. He thinks you have to be able to give, as a justification, I can see that it's red, rather than I'm a reliable reporter of red things. Now, exactly how different this is, he and I disagree about. I see as sort of in the middle, saying, well, I can tell red things when I see them. Why? Do you think these are non-standard conditions? That's my justification. Sellars thinks that you have to be reliable and know you're reliable. That is, know that the inference from I claim that it's red under these conditions to it's red is a good inference. And if you're an internalist like that, I should say, before we go on, to complicate things even more, I have yet a different view, which is that the third person point of view is the one that does matter for attributions of knowledge, and that the third person attributor of reliability can, for someone who cannot themselves give a justification, attribute knowledge because they, but not the person who has it, can make the reliability inference. So that's sort of an AC/DC externalism, socially perspectival externalism. Anyway, so it says if I require all of this, that in order to know that something is green by looking at it, it's not enough that I can apply the concept non-inferentially, that I can apply it reliably, that I have the concept. Those are not enough. I have to know that I can apply it reliably. If all of that is required for me to know non-inferentially that something is green, how in the world does anybody acquire this? And the story that he tells, and this goes over runs through 37 on here, is, well, you get reliable first in just responding. You acquire the concept not yet as an observational concept. You hook these things up, and at a certain point, you're able to make the inferences and know that you're reliable. It's a truth dawns gradually over the whole sort of picture. If you want to look at the details, he gives them here. I think the important thing to think about in this acquisition picture is that on his account, there isn't some metaphysical bright line that's crossed. Before this, I didn't know non-inferentially that things were green. After this, I did, because some kind of light went on inside. The young one who at 18 months stumbles into the living room and for her first coherent utterance says, "Daddy, the house is on fire," has not managed to claim that the house is on fire, does not believe that the house is on fire. She doesn't know all of the inferences involved. The 3-year-old who does that does, and you can ask, well, how do you know? Did you smell smoke? What is it? They've both, in between, the young one has gotten better at all of the transitions, the entries, the exits, and especially the language-language moves. And they've gotten better to the point that it makes sense to hold them responsible. You take them to have made this claim, to have expressed a belief, by asking for their reasons, by making them justify the claim that they've given. Until they're good enough at that, there's just no point. But the change in status is a change in normative status. That's a change in social status. It's a change in when we start holding them responsible, attributing to them the authority of licensing us to make inferences from their claims and so on. And that's not happening between their ears. That's happening in the social practices that we have. And his story about acquiring these concepts is essentially a story about a change in the normative status that you have, rather than some internal Cartesian light going on that, now I can, for the first time, see and know that something is green non-inferentially. There isn't some line like that. Okay, I'll stop here. Next time, I'll talk a little bit about the second half of the essay. Not a great deal. There's a good story there, but it's philosophy of mind. The most important stuff is happening here. We'll talk about the phenomenalism essay, which is a fabulous essay in its own right. Again, there's a move. It's not as big as this move, but there's a big, important original move there that casts a different light on casts new light on what's going on here.